All right, welcome to Road to SEA 2023. This is Shelley-Ann Edwards Barron, and I'm a creative writing specialist. Every week, I bring for you information about SEA, but today we're taking a little detour as we've been doing in August, and I have a wonderful guest with me. Now, the lives that I do usually stream in a group called SEA, the Priestfield Approach. If you're not already a member and you're heading to SEA 2023, please join the group where you're welcome to join and get lots of information there on math, on creative writing, comprehension, grammar. We cover everything so that you can get as much support as possible. So this week, I'm going to be interviewing my special guest, who I'll get to in a moment, because a couple of weeks ago, maybe about last month or so, a couple members of that group, SEA Peaceful Approach, asked questions about homeschooling. Now, I know when parents are getting into SEA and the distress and everything starts, you feel the drama happening. Many people think, okay, maybe I should do homeschooling and forget about this whole SEA thing altogether. So my guest today is Dr. Fiona Rajkumar, and she is the corporate secretary for the Homeschool Association of Trinidad and Tobago. So we're going to be talking all about homeschooling, all the information you need to get started if it's something that you're thinking about, and a few guidelines in terms of what to expect when you step into homeschooling. Because I can tell you from experience, what you might think it is going to be is not exactly what it's going to be, and you really do have to be prepared. So I am ultra excited to welcome my friend and colleague, past colleague. Yeah, we go way back, don't we?
We do.
We
We
do,
do.
we do, we do, we do. We go way back. So thank you so much, Fiona, for agreeing
You're
to this
welcome.
interview. I really, really appreciate the time because I know you are quite busy being a homeschool mom and a full-time lecturer as well. So
Yes,
tell us a little bit more about yourself and about the Homeschool Association, and then we will get into the questions from there.
sure. So, hello everyone. As Shelley said, my name is Fiona Rajkumar, and I'm the corporate secretary of the Homeschool Association of Trinidad and Tobago. I have been homeschooling. My husband and I have been homeschooling our children for a few years now. In terms of our backstory, we would say that homeschooling was actually the approach to education that we took. And so, you can say that we came into parenting with a mindset to homeschool, right? And so when we did have children, that was the approach that we took to them. So we have a daughter that is 14 now, and we have one that is 9.5. And so we have been homeschooling them. The 14-year-old did a stint at preschool for about a year and a half, but that has been her main interaction with public school. And our 9.5-year-old, she hasn't been to regular school, right? So homeschooling has been an interesting journey. It has its ups and its downs, its challenges and its triumphs. But overall, it has been really good as a parent to be vested and involved in our children's lives, because we also see homeschooling as allowing us to shape them in many ways, not just academic. And I think for us, that was pretty important, the way that we shape academics, being able to bring life to areas that younger children would not usually be exposed to, whether it is science or history or literature, being able to explore their space a little more, whether it is the country, being able to focus on emotional needs, other developmental aspects of their person, and being able to have those kinds of conversations with the young children. Now that we have a teen, I can see how some of that has paid off in the kinds of discussions that I'm able to have with her, and some of the things she's able to freely share, because she would have seen her parents as a very important part of her network as well. And so for that, I'm very grateful, right? In terms of the Homeschooling Association, association has been in existence for probably about 9 years now. It was started by, the idea was generated by a mom in a fellowship group that I belonged to before my older daughter was born. And she really felt that one day would come when we would need an association, a homeschooling association. And I think that that was really a visionary idea. And so those founding families in that group, we would have put up finances and resources to have a lawyer help us to incorporate the Homeschool Association as a formal NGO. And so to be able to interact with the government or public officials, if needs be, to be able to be an advocate for homeschooling in Trinidad and Tobago, to be able to provide information and training and support for parents who would eventually want to homeschool. And so these are some of the pillars, main pillars, objectives of the association. And fast forward to 2022, COVID has really sort of opened up the interest of parents in homeschooling, you know, and so over the past
Definitely.
2.5 years, we've sort of been inundated with questions about homeschooling. And so HAT has attempted to play an important role in just educating parents and interested persons in what homeschooling is and how they can go about doing it if that is a choice they would like to make.
Yes, you mentioned interacting with the government and so on, but before we get to the the details of what the organization does and what resources and so on are available, tell us a little bit about the landscape for homeschooling in Trinidad and Tobago. What are in your based on your experience and your knowledge, is there a huge group of homeschoolers or is it a small group? And what are the government regulations regarding homeschooling?
Well, firstly, in terms of homeschooling, sometimes persons may not always be very clear as to what homeschooling is. And so from the association's perspective, the Homeschool Association of Trinidad and Tobago sees homeschooling as parent-directed education. And so the parent would be the main directors of the education and sometimes the main teachers as well. This is not to say that we don't have tutors or assistants, because many homeschool parents have tutors and assistants, right? And so you would find that you may need specialty help, whether it may be music or Spanish or sports or some area, right, writing. But generally, you would be the main director and teacher. And so that's different from, say, if a parent is a full-time working parent, and so you have a tutor working with you. So we don't see that as homeschooling. We see that as private tuition, and there is a market for that as well. But homeschooling specifically is where the parents are the one who works with their children. And so you may have a lot of people saying, let me come. So they may say that they're opening homeschools and they may say, let me homeschool your children for you. And so that's not how we see homeschooling. That's antithetical, right? Homeschooling is not public school done in a home, right? We see homeschooling as parents guided and direct. So the parents have a vision for what they would like to see done, with their child's education, and they make the intentional efforts to execute that vision outside of private or public school. And so that is what we see homeschooling as, right? And so just to clear that up, because we've had people call the association and ask us to homeschool their children for them. And so we have to really clarify to them what homeschooling is. Yes?
And I think that also speaks to the level of commitment from the parent that is required for the homeschooling, because I know, like you said, some parents are frustrated with the education system that we have, so they want alternatives, and they think the whole homeschooling is a viable alternative, but they're working full time. They don't have the time to sit with their children the way homeschooling often requires, and the systems that are put into place are really an alternative to the standard system, but it's still not homeschooling. It's like a sort of hybrid, or simply, as you said, formal education at home, but not necessarily involving the parent.
Yes, correct. So homeschooling, it directly involves the parents, right?
Okay.
Parent or parents, right? So what was the other part of the question?
The
Or the main
government.
question?
So considering that we have the definition now. So if a parent decides then, for example, they're going to enroll in an online school, that's not necessarily homeschooling unless the parent is actively involved in what's happening. It could just be that you're doing an online academic program, and that's fine, but not
Yeah.
necessarily homeschooling, because homeschooling requires more significant parental involvement based on the definition that you've set. Now, what does
Yes.
the government of Trinidad and Tobago have to say about that? The
About
idea of
homeschooling.
homeschooling, yeah.
Well, in terms of from the government's perspective, homeschooling is perfectly legal. It is a constitutional right of parents to be able to choose to have an education of choice for their children, whether it is public, private, or homeschooling. What we are in the process of doing now is working with the Ministry of Education, specifically the CEO's office, to formulate a homeschooling policy. So in terms of actual regulations, homeschooling is not as regulated as we would say in certain states in the US or other parts of the world. And so that is the phase that we are in right now. So currently, if you're interested in homeschooling, what we do is we encourage parents to, so we do as an association, we have guidelines which cover areas that we encourage parents to think about, because it is not just a matter of pulling your children out of school, okay? You have to consider what you are doing and if homeschooling is really what you want to do. And so those guidelines help you to think through what is homeschooling, different philosophies and approaches to homeschooling, different curriculum, whether you want to use the local curriculum or if you want to use foreign-based curriculum, if you want to use a hybrid, if you are, because there are also online providers that offer full school, but there are also online providers that specifically focus on homeschooling. And so we use one of those providers. We have used one of those providers called Wisdom Homeschooling for literature and to some extent writing as well, as our first daughter got older. And so there are many, many options. And so to help parents think through those options, I mean, the thing with it as well is that it's a very organic process and experience, right? And because homeschooling is something that is education that can be customized or tailored to the child. Yes. And so, I mean, that is one of the positives, the advantages, because if something is not working for a child in the system, it is often very difficult to change it because you can't change the system. But if you're homeschooling and you see that something, an approach or a curriculum is really not working after you make some effort into trying it, it's really not working, you are able to be flexible to change it. And so we help parents to think through these things. And then after you have, you should consider sending a letter of intent to homeschool to the CEO's office. And so we also have some guidelines and a template for that as well, that we offer to parents. And they can send their information to the Ministry of Education, and the Ministry of Education would generally respond with an acknowledgement letter. And so currently that is what is in process, right? The members of the board of the association in the past, last year, end of 2021 into 2022, started working with the past or then CEO on a homeschooling policy. The CEO has since changed, and so we will be approaching the new CEO to see if we can continue that process in a way that preserves the right of families to homeschool, but as well, of course, ensures quality in homeschooling as well.
So in terms of what a parent can expect then, so let's say the parent decides, you know what, I want my kids to learn differently. I want different experiences for them from what the school is offering, the government schools, that our standard education system. And the parent does the letter, gets the response, and so now they are officially, in that sense, homeschooling. What are some of the things then that a parent would need to have either already in place or be putting in place to ensure that it's effective?
Well, what you should have is some more concrete ideas of what you mean by learn differently, okay? So that could actually flesh out into what your homeschool would look like and what kind of curriculum you can use to support you as you do that, right? Additionally, having some goals, some milestones, some markers that you're working towards. So for instance, there are parents who want to prepare their children for SE. And so if they want to prepare their children for SE, then they know that there are certain things that they have to do, certain areas that they would have to focus on, but they don't have to narrow their homeschool to that, right? So in that way, of course, you'd have to prepare them for the math, the language arts, and the creative writing. But we know that sometimes in school, after a while, that's all they do, right? In homeschooling, you are able to expand that offering to them for, as their primary school options, while also preparing them for SE, okay? And then there may be parents who may choose to just send their children to private school and not do SE. And so they have a private school that they would like to send their children to. Oftentimes there are some private schools that may have entry exams. And so they would focus more on preparing their children for the entry exam for the private school. And again, it shapes what they're able to do in terms of, right, the homeschooling curriculum. And then there are other parents who want to continue homeschooling into secondary school. And so with that in mind, they may have, they may be more working towards CSEC or SATs or some other exam. And so all of these goals that you have would shape what your homeschool would look like and its purpose. And so these are some of the foundational things that we encourage parents to think through, because that will definitely impact the structure of your homeschool, the subject areas that you focus on, your approach to homeschooling, right? Because those are all different goals, right?
Yeah. So it's more about embracing what you want to do rather than avoiding what you don't want.
That's correct. That's correct.
So parents really shouldn't see homeschooling as, okay, I can avoid the standard system, let me homeschool. They should see homeschooling more as, this is going to allow me to implement what I would like to implement. So they do need to have that guide, or at least some sort of vision of what they want out of the whole process.
Yes, that's correct. So that's really because it has the potential to really shape your mindset and your approach to education. And so we encourage them to begin thinking about, well, what is my philosophy of education? Because as you rightly said, we really, there's some parents who homeschool and they do homeschool school at home in a very traditional way. And they just want to move through to do SCA. And nothing is wrong with that, nothing is wrong with that at all, because they may have had different issues in the public system. But we do also encourage, as much as possible, a broader approach and a broader, having a wider perspective as to what homeschooling can be, and how that can positively impact the education and the direction that you take your children in, now if you don't have those sorts of limitations within the system. So it's not, so you see it in a much more proactive, positive light, as opposed to I am running from something, as opposed to I am creating something.
Yeah, and I think that for me is the real crux of what homeschooling is about, and that mindset shift that you spoke of, because I realized that many of the questions about homeschooling and should I homeschool come from an element of frustration with the existing system. So many times the reason it's an idea in the first place is because I don't like what options I have, so I want a different option. As opposed to, as in your case, as you said, you had intended to homeschool even before you had children because of what your experience was with the education system, and not because of what the child had an experience and you decide to take the child out. This was a plan from the beginning and say, listen, you know what? I need certain levels of morals and values and a broader experience, that having to do that while the child is in the traditional school system is going to create a conflict. So you know what? Let me just do the homeschooling and I'd be able to, to manage and arrange it in a particular way.
Very,
Yeah.
very, very true. Very true. And so you find that is a main difference. That you have parents who long pre-COVID would have chosen to homeschool because precisely that, they want to instill a measure of moral excellence in their children, or they want to help them develop a particular kind of value system. They want to teach them things like other-centeredness, emotional intelligence. They want to do gift and talent-based education. And so they have a vision for who they want their child to be. And so the education approach that they are building is predicated on that. When my child is 18 or 21, this is the product, this is the outcome that I would like to see. And so what do I have to do to work towards that outcome? And yes, sometimes it is you have a lot to fight against if they are in the system, and there are those who say, well, children need to be in the real world. I think that the real world is all around us.
Yeah.
And homeschooling is not a bubble that you put your child in, They will always have to interact with people because, many of us are involved in different kinds of activities. And so you meet people and children, even in our homeschool community, you meet different kinds of people and children, and you are challenged to practice those character traits that you see as positive when you meet challenges and different kinds of attitudes and mindsets and those kinds of things, So you really work with what kind of outcome do you want to see in the child, and you build. So things like character studies, value and morals training. There are many parents who purchase formal curriculum as that, and they do it as a subject area with assessments and stuff, right? Then there are those who are a little less informal, but just as intentional in terms of how they do those areas. And so far, things like just morning devotions and discussions about different things and circumstances we might have experienced and all of that. And sometimes if nothing else happens in the day, but those kinds of discussions happen, I would have seen it as being a very important step towards helping them to manage the real world,
And
that they will go into.
As you brought that up, what are some of the objections that you would hear? Because there are some people who have, I don't want to say a negative view of homeschooling, but they see it as less than what the standard schooling would allow and would produce. Because they think, okay, so the parent is doing it, they're doing it, they see it as the parent doing it by themselves. So two questions coming out of that. One, what are, let's say, maybe one or two objections to homeschooling that a parent may have in terms of less than positive attitude about homeschooling? And two, you mentioned community, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about that homeschooling community as well. So first the objections, and then we'll talk about the community.
In terms of objections, there's some typical objections that you will meet. So I think maybe one of the number one objections would be socialization. Many people think that if you are homeschooling, then your child will not be properly socialized, right? And the thing with homeschooling, you have different kinds of socialization happening. So you would have, because the family is the first unit of socialization of a child, okay? So it's like an extension of that. When a child comes into the world, it comes into an environment. And so homeschooling allows children to socialize with persons who are older than they are, right? And adults as well. And so sometimes that's how you may find quite a few homeschooling children something may stand out about them. They may be a bit more mature in terms of how they interact. And sometimes that is because of who they are exposed to, right? They are not only exposed to their peers. And so because of that, they're able to interact in different kinds of ways, because a 5-year-old who's being homeschooled will not only be exposed to 5-year-olds, they may be exposed to their younger sibling and how to treat with their younger sibling, how to care for their younger sibling. And so they have to interact with their older siblings. And so in that way, you'll find that their intelligence is challenged as they seek to interact with someone who's older than them on a regular basis, because this is their school, right? And there are actually curricula that are created like that they created knowing that families have multi-levels. And so they create subject areas, common subject areas like history and literature and those areas that multiple age group of children can do. And so the similar information is coming to you, just the way it's assessed is different, you know? And so in that way, you find that socialization process is broadened for homeschooling children in certain kinds of ways. And as well, I remember years ago, the mom whose ideas it was, Bernadette Francis, that we should have a formal association, would have done an interview, and she would have said that we never encourage persons to homeschool in isolation. And so if you are choosing to homeschool, get connected. Even if it's you find you on your own, find one or two other families and you come together, you know, and you work together and you allow your children to interact. So because before there was a formal association and before, you know, she had her own group. And, you know, so this you're looking at, you know, 15 to 20 years ago when homeschooling was a lot less popular. You had families finding each other and connecting and doing things together. And so they would intentionally create these little communities of social. So they would go on outings, they would do arts and crafts and civics and all of these things together, you know. And so socialization is something that parents, it can be a challenge, but it is definitely also something that as a parent, it's a hurdle that you can overcome. Right?
Many opportunities. So we were talking about the community and the fact that parents should not really believe that when they're doing homeschooling, it's an individual, me alone and my children kind of thing. Because, like you said, we are preparing children for interaction and functioning in the real world. And that includes having to interact with other people. So we have organizations such as clubs, plus there is a homeschooling community. So I wanted to find out a little bit more about that community. I know now is probably a lot larger than it used to be since homeschooling is now considered more legitimate, I guess. It's something that, you know, based on the fact that we were all home having education at home, many more people saw that, hey, you know, this is something that's doable. So do you find now that there's an influx of people who are transitioning, and has the community been growing? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, I would definitely say that because of COVID-19, the homeschooling, those who are interested in homeschooling, it has increased greatly. And but it also means differences as well. So as I would have said, prior to COVID, you would have found many more parents who would have chosen to homeschool for specific reasons, whether it is, you know, this is the philosophy that they wanted to embrace, or they might have had special needs children. And so there were different things that they needed to do for those children that wasn't happening fast enough in the system. And so this is the route they would have gone. And there would have been children who would have been experiencing severe bullying as well. And so their parents felt as though they need to create a safer environment for their children, would have been a better option for them. And so you would have had, you know, these families choosing to homeschool. With COVID, the need to preserve health became a very important reason for the growing interest in homeschooling. Also, parents who were now close to see what was happening to their children, and they might have realized where their children really were in terms of, you know, some strengths that their children would have had that they really wanted to explore, or some challenges that they realized that their children had, that they didn't realize how severe these challenges were, and they wanted to sort of nip that in the bud, to work with their children. We found that, we started to get a lot of calls to find out more about homeschooling and what was possible and those kinds of things. And so, yes, our membership has really increased over the past 2.5 years. I think we've probably gone over the 200 family membership mark, and this is just the association, right? They have family. I mean, being a member of the association is not something that's mandatory. And so we'd have a constant stream of calls from parents who need advice or who are already homeschooling and want to get information, who are not members as well, So I would say that homeschooling is it is something that people are becoming much more aware of. I mean, we would also get calls from social workers, different people who just want to know more about homeschooling so that they could have information that if parents either speak to them or if they interact with parents, that they're able to, just have some basic information.
Okay. So the community is growing, and there's definitely a community. And I know that I think, are there other associations for homeschooling?
No, I wouldn't say that there are other formal associations. There are Facebook groups that would give information on homeschooling. So they'd have people who are there and they'd share resources. But HAT is the only formal association that is dedicated towards advocacy where homeschooling in Trinidad and Tobago is concerned.
Okay.
And to sort of building that kind of building a community and offering services. And so, for instance, we have like support groups. We've expanded our support groups. So now you have general HAT activities, but now we have support groups, smaller groups where families are able to get together and work in smaller groups.
Okay. And what's the process for becoming a member? And are there like obligations once you're a member of the association?
Right. So in terms of becoming a member, we do have a membership form that we encourage parents to fill out. And so when they fill out that form, it goes to the administrator. The administrator logs the information and sends back a response in terms of payment. It's a $200 yearly fee or annual fee per family to be a member of the association. And so the information is sent back to the parent, and the parent finishes that process and they get a welcome letter. And so then when you become a formal part of the database, whatever is happening, you are made privy to, right? So we have an arrangement with Center of Excellence. So we have a swim club thing going on with them. And so you would get your notification if you want to continue as part of the swim club or join the swim club, your instructions. And so we have last term, we started that back because, of course, it wasn't happening during COVID.
Yeah.
And so that started back last term. And it was a small group of families that started, and they seem to have had a really nice time. And they had a little closing off ceremony with their certificates and all of that, And so different groups, the groups are generally autonomous. And so they get to plan the activities that they want to do during the term and all of that. And so we had groups from before, maybe about 3 or 4 groups from before. And so that has kind of doubled now. And we do have geographic specific groups. So we have South, East, West. And so persons can have a place if they would like to intentionally be able to be part of their own community within a larger community.
So then the idea of homeschooling, just to sort of summarize what we've chatted about so far, is homeschooling is a commitment, just like there is a commitment to the traditional educational system. And if you are going to shift to the homeschooling possibility and opportunity, then make sure you have a vision for what you would like done and how you would like your child to be at the end of the process. And I think for me, that applies also to the traditional system, but for many parents, and I say we because that's how I was in the beginning, you know, you have children, you know, they're supposed to go to school, you send them. And so there wasn't really a clear plan that I want my child in this school, I want my child to learn this, I want my child to be this at the end. And I know there are quite a number of parents who are like that. They know education is important, so they send their children to school. But
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to education, you do need some sort of vision in order to be
Yes.
able to guide, whether you're in traditional
Yes.
or homeschooling. But
Correct.
more so with homeschooling, since you are the one responsible for
Correct.
managing the situation. And
Yes.
while that might seem a bit daunting, there are opportunities and communities like the ones associated with the Homeschool Association where parents can access information, access support, guidance, as well as fellowship to
Correct.
for both parents and children.
Correct. Correct. Because I
Because
mean,
it's
really, I mean, it's as you say, it can be daunting, um, but it's a journey, and so you can find, and I mean, homeschooling, the more you do it, the more you learn.
Mhm.
I can't say that. I mean, it's not like you don't go and get a PhD in homeschooling. you know, it's not like that. So I'm also a little bit wary of the concept of homeschooling experts because homeschooling is something it is very family specific as well, and so you don't want to fall into the trap of thinking, because I mean, we also help parents to understand that there's no right way to homeschool because people want to know the right way to do it. You do your needful with the ministry and the legalities and all of those things. But I do not. So, for instance, the way that I may homeschool, I don't tell a parent, well, you need to homeschool like me and use the same curriculum like me because that's the right way to do it. And so that's where the real challenge of the journey comes in, you know, because it's a discovery process as well. What works for you as a teacher, what works for the children. And so that takes observation, just, working with them and working with the curriculum, whether it is a local curriculum or your homeschooling curriculum, and seeing, and sometimes you find a really good fit for the stage of life you're in and the goals that you have. And when that happens, it's like, wow. And then sometimes you realize that one curriculum is not a good, is not the be all and end all. You learn after a while, as you grow in confidence, you learn, as you know what you want to do, you learn to mix and match a few
Yes,
things. You learn
yes,
to
yes.
create your own resources, YouTube, and there's a world of resources there. And you learn to become a researcher in certain kinds of ways and sift through. So as you said, there's a commitment that is involved in homeschooling, and um, you become the expert in your children,
Mhm.
and what they need. And so that is and I mean, when more and more research shows that when parents become involved in their children's education, whether you're in traditional school or homeschooling, that really helps with the outcomes, but just academic outcomes alone, because they know that they have support, they have somebody who helps keep them on task, who takes interest in them, who helps them to work through issues they may have, personal issues that may be impacting how they study. And so you find
Mhm.
all of those things because, academic success and achievement would be made up of a number of different areas,
Yes, and then
you
the
know,
vision really is
and
not
so
only
homeschooling
for
helps with that.
academics.
That's
Yeah.
correct. It's not only for academics, but academics is also bolstered by development in other areas. How you
Yeah.
manage stress, how how you manage your time, and so you're able to intentionally teach those things to your children because those are life skills. And so
Mhm.
life skills and life management is really important. Children are also become much more involved in the home. And so it sets them up if you want to have your own family, what that would look like, that's the real world. Because a lot of times we
Yes.
have young people who would have left school, left university, but, and so they can, have a successful career, But then the other aspects of their lives, they may struggle, with it
Yeah.
in terms of managing themselves, being able to care for themselves, being able to manage a relationship, have children, set up a home. When you are in a homeschooling environment, even if you didn't think about it, parents quickly realize that you have to find ways, if you want to be able to have some time to actually homeschool, to manage the home life part of it.
Yes.
And children become involved in that. So many of them, they learn to cook, they have their chores, and they have responsibilities, and they learn to work together as a family. And so these are some really important side
Yes.
byproducts as well.
And I like the way you put it, I think some parents think, especially as children get older, they have to be subject matter experts in different issues where academics are concerned. But what you said just now, I think, sums it up. You said you become an expert in your children. And that's the real goal, making sure that your child has what they need, or your children have what they need to become effective adults and successful adults.
Yes,
And
correct.
that's the aim. So
That's
that is going to
correct.
vary from child to child,
That's
what is
correct.
needed, what is
That's
required,
correct.
and the process of doing that. So
That's
it's a
correct.
whole learning journey, as you mentioned. And I love the fact that you mentioned there is no right or wrong way. I guess
Mhm.
if, because sometimes you think, okay, I'm doing this wrong. Well, make an adjustment. What
Mhm.
isn't working for you, figure out what that
Mhm.
is, and ask a question.
Mhm.
You're in a community, reach out,
Mhm.
even
Mhm.
if you need assistance like that to figure out, okay, what can I do instead? There are
Mhm.
options.
Mhm.
So yes,
Definitely,
yeah.
definitely, definitely. And we also encourage parents to think about the fact that what they do as homeschoolers ultimately contributes to nation building. So the
Hmm.
products of your homeschool, these young people that you'll put out, whether you put them out, whatever level you put them out at, whether they are integrated into primary school, some people may do the preschool and the young years, and then they go into primary school, or some may go up to SC, and then they go out into secondary school. But at whatever juncture your children become part of the formal system, or whether it is when they go to university, or whatever it is, to understand that these are citizens that you are producing, citizens of your nation, your region, and ultimately the world, the global environment. And so to also see it as part of building a nation. We have so many challenges now with young people and with crime and so many issues. And so as the association, we are very intentional as well about helping parents to understand that this is part of the solution. You know, if you have 200 families that have, over 500 to 1,000 children, and these young people are upstanding citizens, then they are 200, 500 to 1,000 less or fewer criminals, right? Who
Hmm.
can contribute in whatever area they're placed in, who are young people who are upstanding, they have values, they want to be intentional about building their nation. And so we also see HAT and homeschooling as part of our responsibility to producing a Trinidad and Tobago that we want to live in as we get older, and to making our children conscious of that as well.
Hmm.
Happy independence.
Yes. Yeah, I was just about to say, and it's such a fitting time to have this kind of interview because we're looking at emancipation and independence,
Independence,
and
correct.
we're sort of in the middle of that right now. We're
Yes.
just about in the middle of the month,
Yes.
having passed emancipation and heading to independence. And, during August, that's the time when, for those of us who reflect on those kinds of things, we're reminded of what, where we came from, where we might want to go, and
That's
so on.
correct.
And homeschooling is definitely, well, it's not for everyone, and
No,
it's
correct.
an
Exactly.
alternative. It's an
Mm-hmm.
alternative for those who would like to choose it, but
Mm-hmm.
it's really an advocacy for parents being more intentional about their children's education. So if you
Yes,
decide to stay in the traditional system, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's fine.
correct.
But what is your aim? What is your vision
That's
for
correct.
what's going to happen within the traditional system?
That's correct.
If you're going to homeschool, then same question. What is your
Mm-hmm.
aim? What is your vision? What are you hoping that your children come out of it with at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day? So
Mm-hmm.
it's really about being intentional. So for those who are considering homeschooling, and then when they think about this in it's not for me because I did that for years. My younger daughter, she just from I think she was in standard three when she asked me, "Mommy, can you homeschool me?" And I told her, well, at that time, I was not in a position to do it at all. So I told her no. So we went through the whole SEA. And then when she got into Form 2, that's when, so this is in the height of COVID and coming out of it. And I decided, you know what? I actually do have more time that I can dedicate to this now. And like you said, it's a learning process, it's a learning curve because there's a lot more to it than I even imagined coming into it with some education about what it is. There's still a lot more to it than I had originally imagined. And in my case, I'm doing a sort of hybrid because
Yes.
I have enrolled her in a formal online education system, not for Trinidad and Tobago because of where I know she wants to go. She's doing a Canadian high school diploma. So she is getting that formal education there. But for me, one of the main reasons, aside from the health risk, with COVID and schools shutting down, and there's several people in the class that she was in who got COVID when they went back out, and there was a whole that's part of it. But I am very concerned about the moral values and her exposure to certain things. So that while I'm not trying to hide her away from the world, I do want a little more control over what she's exposed to. And
Yes.
school is from most schools begin at 8, sometimes a little earlier. They end around 2, 3 o'clock. Even secondary schools, fall generally within that time. And during that time, which is a pretty large chunk of the day, there is, you have less of an impact as a parent on the type of people they associate with, parents, teachers, students, the whole school environment. Even if you selectively go to a private school or one of the better schools, you know how we have these categories in this country. Um, I don't agree with a lot of it, but there are parents who think like that. Even if you select all of that, you still have less of an impact, and then you have to manage a lot of
Yeah.
things that I prefer not to have to manage right now.
Yeah.
So it has definitely been a journey for me. And this conversation has been quite enlightening. And I think I'm going to go back and review, what exactly my vision for um her education is. And even with her sister, she went up to CSEC, but after CSEC, I also look at the system and what is required now. The world has changed.
It
It
does.
it has it has been changing, but COVID sort of sped up certain things and made certain other things a lot clearer than they would have been before. So we are living in such a wonderful time that we can decide, we can
Yes.
choose, we have
Correct.
options,
Correct.
and
Very different from when we were
homeschooling is one
younger.
of them. Yeah, when
Very different. Very
I
different.
am certain if there were more homeschooling communities and opportunities, my mom would have homeschooled us because I think we were, at least in my case, if I remember correctly, I went into primary school. So the preschool,
Hmm.
we were homeschooled for preschool and then entered the system at primary school. But she was doing education at the time. She has always had that vision for education for us. So she was doing her associate degree in education at the time as well. And I'm quite certain if there was a stronger community, and this was quite a number of years ago, I wouldn't tell you exactly how many years ago. But I think, the decision might have been a little bit different had there
Mm-hmm.
been the kind of opportunity that we have now. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
very, very happy that I had this opportunity to chat with you so that I can share this understanding of what exactly homeschooling is, what are the opportunities, and the fact that homeschooling is one option, traditional schooling is another option, but there
That's
are still
correct.
other options between. And as a
Yes.
parent, you can do a little bit of exploration and research and decide which one would work best for you and your situation, and most importantly, work best for your child or children. Yeah.
Yes.
So, do you have any final words that you'd like to share with those who are considering it, those who maybe have already started but they're not sure, where to go next?
Mm-hmm. I think in terms of any words I would give, it would be to do keep in mind that homeschooling, as I said, is a journey. One of the things for me would have been I didn't expect that I would learn so much on this journey as well,
Hmm.
as a parent. But also I became a learner in many ways. Some of the materials that we were exposed to was very exciting for me to learn alongside with my children. One of the curriculum that we used early on called Sunlight, which is a literature-based curriculum, because I love reading and I wanted the children to love reading as well. And so that was a complete curriculum, and they sent all the books and stuff. And their tagline was something to do with it's like how you would have liked to have been taught, you know. And for me, yeah, that approach is how I wanted to be taught. You have your books, and for literature, for history, for science, and you just got to explore, and it was comfortable. You start with the children and you read, and they ask questions. You could go on, so if you're doing science, you also learn about the scientists. You're doing history, but it's very child friendly narratives, and so both of them are not afraid of reading and exploring in that way. And so many children in the regular system find reading is just horribly boring. Um, and that sort of blocks them off from learning so much.
Hmm.
So I want to encourage parents who homeschool that it is such a tremendous opportunity to impact your children in a positive way, to impact their attitudes towards education, towards learning, to shape their character in ways that are positive. But it also is a lot of responsibility for you, because you're one of the main influencers. The family in the home becomes a main influencer to the child, and you want to also be aware of your own health levels.
Yes.
Am I an anxious person, fearful person, short-tempered person, impatient person? And so as much as we are shaping their character, our characters have to be intentionally shaped as well. So we are back in school with them, you know? And so that's why it's such a journey. And it's a journey that you can do with other parents, as I said, not in isolation. The Homeschool Association can be contacted. I'll give you your email. Homeschool, just now I had it and it disappeared. Right, homeschool.tt@gmail.com, homeschool.tt@gmail.com. So, you can send an email to us. The administrator will respond, sending some of the guidelines that you could think about. You can send a WhatsApp or a voice note to 7305075. That is currently my number, but the association now has a formal number, which we'll begin to use now. So yeah, and to encourage parents on this journey. And as you rightly said, homeschooling is not for everybody. It's not something that we're touting for everybody. Everybody's not able to homeschool because of time, circumstances, or whatever. But if you are able to homeschool, it takes commitment, tenacity. Yes, it does take a measure of patience,
Hmm.
but and there are times when you will feel discouraged. There are times when you will feel burnt out. And if if you try to think about the perfect way of doing it, you may find yourself feeling stressed out because you may always be second guessing yourself, you know. But taking an approach where, you have an idea of, as I said, where you would like to go. And so you're able to shape your education in that way, as opposed to maybe a lot of comparisons. So where you're saying, okay, well, look, and they're doing this, and so maybe I need to do this, and they said this, and so maybe I need to do this. And so that could cause conflict, But if you continue to just step forward, one day at a time, take it one day at a time, from the families who I've seen who've gone through the process, who've gone before me, and whose children have either completed CSEC or are now in university, I think that the sacrifice has indeed paid off in certain ways. It's not a perfect, nothing is perfect. So it's not a perfect option or solution, but it is an option that parents have, and they can make the most of whatever options they choose, same as in the traditional system. And we work alongside the ministry. We are not an antagonistic body or movement, to say that we are creating a parallel universe.
No.
But I see, right, but I see but I think HAT sees homeschooling as something that is part of bolstering education in Trinidad and Tobago. And I personally see homeschooling as something that is part of education reform, because some of the ways that we would like to see education reformed, or the ways that the ministry is envisioning education reform, because I'm also on a committee created by the Minister of Education to think about reform in different areas of the education system. I can see how homeschooling allows for us to put certain things into practice as parents that will take longer to come into practice as a system. Whether it is exactly that focus on values training and character development and other-centeredness and nation building, to incorporate those concepts consciously into an education system, value shaping, because children will come from different environments in their home, and they will come into a system, and those different values will clash, and they will clash with each other, but they may also clash with what, the government, the ministry may want for the wider nation. And so as homeschooling parents, you are able to seriously sit down and conceptualize, really, where do I want to go with this? And as I said, you can add, how can it positively impact my environment?
Yep. And then it goes back to that intentional vision, clarity, knowing that you are an active participant in what's happening.
Correct. That's correct. And so even if you have to integrate your child into, because different things happen, sometimes families go through financial crises, somebody may die, somebody may become ill, and you have to become, the child may have to become part of a traditional system again in certain ways. But you would have built something into your child. But as we've been discussing, you continue to be intentional about what they do and involved, no matter what system of education that they are in, because I think that is part of what it means to be a parent.
Yes, most definitely. So thank you so much for your time. Like I said, I have learned quite a lot, as always, when we have these kinds of conversations. And I'm hoping that our viewers and listeners would learn a lot about what it means to be an active part of their children's education, so they can choose homeschooling or not. The idea is, how involved are you, and whichever system you're choosing should be a choice, not a default. And how are you using the resources to the best of your ability to encourage your child and have your child become that that successful human that we're looking for at the end.
That's
So
correct.
thank you so very, very much for your time.
You're welcome.
And thank you, viewers, for those who were able to listen as it was aired, and those who are looking at the replay. Thank you so much again, and feel free to share. This is something that I think as many parents as possible need to have information on. So please share the videos, like, comment, let us know how useful it was for you. All right, so until again, I think this is the last recorded one. The next one, I'll be live again. So I'll see you when I see you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Bye, Fiona.
Bye-bye.